Hello. Thank you to NextRise organizers for inviting me to speak to carbon markets and net zero state of play and outlooks. I'm sorry that I can't be in Seoul with you for the conference, but I'm in Canada where we are still awaiting full vaccines and are facing heavy travel restrictions, but I'm with you in Seoul in spirit for the conference. I'm KatieSullivan, Managing Director at IETA, the International Emissions Trading Association. IETA has been around for over 20 years, and we came out of the United Nations process. We have evolved to become the trusted global business voice on market solutions to tackle climate change. We work all over the world to help advance the goals of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement. We work very hard with partners and our members and governments to create markets to drive decarbonization and unlock clean private capital and business opportunities at scale. We have over 150 members globally, and this actually is growing quite significantly. And our members are companies that really cross the carbon value chain, from big power and oil and gas and cement and manufacturing to financials, including investors and brokers and traders and other boutique financiers. We have a number of assurance companies. So these are leading greenhouse gas validators and verifiers, law firms, project developers across all sorts of clean project technology types. We also represent many of the leading greenhouse gas standards. So numerous companies all over the world, including many with assets and investments and employees across Asia Pacific, including Korea. So carbon markets are growing. There's a lot of attention now being paid to carbon, including at last week's Financial Times Commodities Global Summit. This is taken from a Bloomberg story last week that showcased how many think the global carbon market could challenge the crude oil market in the coming years. You had big trading houses like Trafigura, who believes carbon has the potential to be 10 times the size of crude trading over the coming years. Andoran Capital expects prices, certainly in Europe, to double and drive higher cost greenhouse gas reduction technologies like hydrogen and carbon capture utilization and storage. You had Vitol Trading House that expects the European carbon market to see prices hit over 75 euro a ton, even by the end of this year. So there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm about the carbon markets, and especially in Europe. And I think that is one of the bigger takeaways, is that this is a European story right now, really, because this is where we have major signals around the carbon market, the EU emissions trading system, and how the European Union, the European Commission, will use the emissions trading system to reach its stringent 2030 climate change target and ultimately its mid-century net zero target. But in Europe, it's a good signal of where things could head around compliance carbon markets globally. And this includes, hopefully, across South Korea and other Asian markets. We will have to, though, see a series of legislation and enforcement around caps and the use of emissions trading and cap and trade to ultimately be consistent with long-term climate goals and net zero goals. It's when this occurs, we will expect to see carbon markets that will rate or re-rate with higher prices, market activity, and confidence, similar to what we've seen in the last 9 months in the European carbon market. So I want to just drive home here that policy certainty and market confidence matters. It matters a lot, especially around this compliance space. And it's not just a story about where carbon prices are today, but what are they expected to be tomorrow, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and how credible are those expectations? So we are seeing a lot of tipping points right now when it comes to climate action, net zero, and carbon markets. There's a lot that has been driven and accelerated because of the COVID pandemic crisis. There's a lot of learnings that have occurred with COVID, where you have systemic risks from the pandemic that have driven a deeper appreciation and move on science and evidence and global cooperation to deal with a global challenge. And a lot of this is similar to what needs to be done in order to tackle the climate change challenge. We also now have the US and the Biden administration. They're very much back at the table when it comes to the Paris Agreement and UN climate diplomacy and domestic action on climate change. We have more climate activism and litigation. We have environmental justice and a push for just transition and the role that carbon pricing and markets can play in order to support that just transition. We have a surge of commitments from corporates and investors on net zero and climate action. So all of these major, trends, and a lot of this has been accelerated over the last even year and a half since COVID. So it's a really exciting time. But what I'd like to do is actually do a refresher or rewind to 2015 and the UN Paris Agreement. This is in 2015 when the countries to the Paris Agreement, they gavelled through that new climate change commitment. And it's a very different agreement to what we saw in Kyoto. Where in Kyoto, you only had some 37 countries with legally binding targets, climate change reduction targets. Now you have the entire world with 197 countries that have put forward their nationally determined contributions, their climate change goals. It is a heroic effort, though. What you have with the Paris Agreement is an aim by the global community, all these 197 countries, to limit global temperature increases to 2 degrees to 1.5 degree Celsius. This is a temperature increase through mid-century. So it is a massive undertaking. As you can see, this will require net zero and balancing all global greenhouse gas sources and sinks by mid-century. So that means we're looking at cutting from close to 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide a year to nearly zero in less than 30 years. This means, like I said earlier, a heroic effort and trillions of dollars annually in clean capital across all sectors of the economy. But it also opens up new markets and opportunities in carbon, both domestically and internationally. And this is an example of the activity occurring in publications and new data, new resources. And a lot of these have been published within the last 3 to 4 weeks. So as you can see, you have the IETA net zero by 2050, a roadmap for the global energy sector. The International Carbon Action Partnership have published a net zero report looking at the role of emissions trading systems and greenhouse gas removals. The World Bank has recently published its report on state and trends in carbon pricing in 2021. And IETA has actually published our updated catalog on carbon markets globally. These are business briefs that capture over 20 emissions trading systems around the world, and they are written through a business lens. So really for executives to read and understand the different pricing and market dynamics in these emissions trading systems, some of the volumes that we're seeing, some of the political and legal risks. So I encourage many of the delegates at NextRise to take a look at those carbon market business briefs. They're available online on IETA's website. So when you look at the Paris Agreement and all of the country targets that have been put forward, or at least were in 2015, again, they're called nationally determined contributions. Under the Paris Agreement, countries are allowed to cooperate via trading, using international markets and trading mechanisms to reach their national climate change goals. They can work together. Even in 2015, when countries initially put forward their commitments, you had over 100 countries that identified they want to use carbon markets, or they need to use international carbon markets to reach their climate change goal. With the Paris Agreement, there's an article, it's Article 6, that allows for this international cooperation and use of markets to reach climate goals and enhance ambition. That agreement, and really the Article 6, is really vital. It will provide the robust accounting and ensure environmental integrity, and ultimately the guidance to use these international markets and trading. And we're also seeing more and more countries that are opening up to the use of international markets as they put forward enhanced climate change goals through the next UN negotiation, the climate change negotiation. And that takes place in Glasgow in November of this year. So what a lot of this is driving, and a lot since 2015, has been bottom-up development of carbon pricing programs around the world. Here is a snapshot of the World Bank's map on compliance carbon pricing programs worldwide. This captures national programs, state programs, and provincial programs. Today, you have around 64 compliance carbon pricing systems in the world. Over half of those are emissions trading systems, like what you have in South Korea with the cap and trade system. Europe has a cap and trade system. California and Quebec have cap and trade systems. You have Canada with a federal output-based pricing system, and you have a number of other different emissions trading programs. And in Colombia and in South Africa, you have a carbon tax, but they can use offsets. They, being businesses, can use offsets to reach their compliance obligations. So this is just a sign of continued growth at the bottom up level with carbon pricing around the world. This is a pyramid that it was produced by the International Carbon Action Partnership, and it captures all of the leading countries, states, and provinces that have put forward net zero proposals or have net zero in legislation. And they have, and then a part of these have identified carbon markets to reach their climate goals and their net zero commitments. So that is what you see in the triangle rectangle ETS, meaning emissions trading systems. All of these jurisdictions that are leaning heavily on emissions trading systems, their carbon markets, to reach their net zero goals. A few things that I'd like to share, just observations from these regions. With EU at the front end. So the European Union has the 2050 net zero target. They have an EU Green Deal with an enhanced 2030 climate change commitment to reduce the EU greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 55% below 1990 levels. And then again, this net zero mid-century goal. The EU emissions trading system, their biggest, well, the world's biggest carbon market, it has been growing significantly, as I said earlier, in recent months. It has been around though since 2005. So it's an older carbon market, cap and trade system. And it has gone through a number of reforms and changes. And as we are looking at 2021 in June, you have record prices in the EU right now at around over 50 euro a ton. By this time last year, June 2020, these prices were around 20 euro a ton. So that gives you a feel for how significantly the market has expanded and prices have increased. In the next couple of weeks, the European Union will publish a reform package for the EU emissions trading system. And as part of that reform package, you'll see a proposal for border carbon adjustments and what sectors will initially be covered by a border carbon adjustment and when. In Europe, this means imports into Europe, potentially cement and steel and aluminum, could be dinged with a carbon price at the borders in order to import that product. Another possible reform to the EU emissions trading system will be an expansion, possibly to transportation fuel. So beyond just industry and power, but could the carbon market cover transportation emissions or shipping? So there's a lot to watch in Europe right now around its growing carbon market. China is certainly another region to watch. China has a 2060 carbon neutral target. And it has an interim target in 2030 to peak China's national greenhouse gas emissions. China has had a number of provincial carbon pricing systems that have been under development in recent years, but only this year, earlier in February of 2021, did China launch its national emissions trading system. It covers the power sector only right now, which translates into around 2,200 power plants, each emitting over 26 kilotons a year of carbon dioxide emissions. So China is poised to become the world's largest carbon market as it expands to cover more sectors over the coming years. So over the coming years, we are expecting it to go from just power to cement, aluminum, chemicals, and other sectors. Over the next week or so, China's national emissions trading system will have the first trades. So this is when we'll have the first prices that emerge from the national program. And we expect, or based on a number of analysts, expect prices to be relatively low in China's carbon market at the front end, so around $6 to $7 US dollars. But this will presumably increase quite significantly as we head through the next 5 to 10 years. The other jurisdiction that's worth mentioning is the United States. Like I said, you have the Biden administration. One of the first orders of business for the Biden administration in the United States was to recommit to the Paris Agreement, rejoin Paris. And the US has put forward an enhanced climate change target, 50 to 52% below 2005 levels of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States by 2030. So quite an ambitious target. And the Biden administration is working very, very closely with trade partners and the UK government to enhance climate diplomacy and climate action through November of this year. Subnationally, though, so at the state level in the United States, there's a lot of action happening on carbon markets and emissions trading. You have California that has a linked cap and trade system to Quebec. They have quite a confident, active market where prices are around $20 US. Currently right now. They also are an economy-wide cap and trade system. So not only covering power and industry, but also transportation coverage. And again, it's also linked to an international jurisdiction, Quebec in Canada. So there's a lot of design elements to the California and Quebec program that are quite unique and a model that other regions are watching closely. My final comment about regionally is obviously in Korea. It is not a surprise to many delegates at NextRise that Korea has an emissions trading system. This is a cap and trade system that has been around for several years. It's entering its third phase of the program, and it covers large power, heavy industry, transportation. They all have compliance obligations under the cap and trade system. And right now there's around 685 facilities in South Korea that have compliance obligations. And there is provision that allows for these companies to use up to 5% of their compliance obligation through greenhouse gas offset credits, both domestically in Korea, so offset credits generated in Korea from projects, and internationally. So, and since the launch, I should say, it has generated over $500 million US, and this is through the auctions of allowances that have gone to government. Now, unfortunately, like all compliance markets, actually, the Korean emissions trading system has experienced challenges since COVID early last year. Prices have dropped significantly, even in the last few months. But unlike a lot of other compliance markets, including Europe and California, Korea's market has not yet recovered. And now we are seeing the lowest price in Korea's emissions trading system since December of 2015. So prices are now around 12,000 won, or around $10 US. There's a variety of reasons for the pricing plummet. There's a big oversupply right now in Korea's carbon market. Also, again, because of the pandemic, there's just lower emissions in Korea. You have right now with the Korean owners, or I guess holders of these allowances, many are not allowed to carry over a lot of these allowances into phase 3 of the program, so for 2022. Not being able to carry over a lot of the allowances they're currently holding, it means that they'll simply expire. And because of this expiry of allowances, it puts this downward pressure on the prices in Korea's program, because again, they cannot be carried over to phase 3. So there's quite a lot of uncertainty right now on government interventions in Korea's market and what reforms we will see. Everybody in the market is awaiting outcome of compliance process later this year in Korea, but there is expectation that liquidity and prices will bounce back as we head through 2022 and future phases of Korea's emissions trading system. Also, when there's more clarity from the Korean government about the role that the Korea emissions trading system will play in reaching longer term targets and ultimately Korea's net zero commitment, this will be absolutely vital. Now, looking at carbon offsets, and how offsets can be used in both compliance carbon markets, like I've just reviewed the compliance carbon market space, but also voluntary carbon markets. And offsets are really vital tools to accelerate the net zero transition. This is just a conceptual illustration of carbon budget pathways through 2050, where you have the green bars are the current and future residual emissions that must be reduced, they must be avoided, and ultimately removed from the atmosphere. That light blue then represents carbon credits that would have to come from greenhouse gas projects that can be reduced, and also the avoidance of emissions. Then you have the darker blue, those represent carbon credits, offsets, that will have to come from biological and technological sequestration or removals. This is the negative emission technologies like nature-based solutions and carbon capture, utilization and storage, and direct air capture. This is, so I want to make it clear to the audience that what this slide represents, it's that it all matters. It is an all hands on deck when it comes to driving offsets and investments in these projects. It will require scaled up capital going into reduction, so greenhouse gas reduction projects generating credits, greenhouse gas avoidance credits, and also greenhouse gas biological technological removal credits. It is so important that all of these types are actually used, and again, investment is deployed in order to ultimately get to our net zero goals. Although there are really important carbon, economic, and temporal considerations related to these different project types as we head through mid-century. This is a very helpful snapshot of all the different greenhouse gas offset crediting programs and standards around the world. It was published by the World Bank very recently, and it shows over 25 offset crediting programs around the world. You have 4 in the red dots that are independent greenhouse gas standards and programs. You have 2 that come the United Nations international crediting programs, and then you have over 20 government domestic offset crediting programs with protocols. This is helpful as it also shows which project types have protocols and methodologies that can generate units and therefore can be monetized. So there are a dozen project types here, from agriculture, energy efficiency, renewables, carbon capture, utilization and storage, waste. So I encourage delegates to take a look at this World Bank report to get more of a feel for where the protocols and methodologies to, again, monetize greenhouse gas reductions or removals or avoidance, where they are available, what prices are currently being generated, and what volumes have been generated to date. So the voluntary carbon market is relatively small compared to the compliance carbon markets, but it is growing quite significantly. And a lot of this is because of new corporate net zero action, climate change commitments and net zero commitments from major companies and investors. We have over 1,000 companies now that have put forward net zero goals. A lot of these are European based and North American based, but you see more and more Asia Pacific companies also putting forward net zero targets. Of the world's 2,000 largest public companies, at least a quarter of them, so 25%, now have net zero commitments. This represents annual sales of nearly $14 trillion from companies with these net zero commitments. A lot of these companies also have interim, so near-term climate change targets, and they are publishing plans and reporting on how they are going to achieve their interim and longer-term goals. Now, a lot of them have to go to the carbon market and the voluntary offsets market in order to reach their climate change commitments, especially over the near term and medium term. But there's still a lot of confusion about where they should be investing their monies into offset project types to ensure there is supply integrity, to unlock co-benefits associated with these investments in offset projects, also to ensure there's demand integrity, that these companies aren't simply purchasing voluntary carbon credits to reach their climate change goals, but they're also looking at their own greenhouse gas reductions within their footprint, and then going to the offsets purchases where required in order to have a robust and defensible pathway to reach their climate change goal. So what I said, the voluntary carbon market, this shows some of the volumes and the prices in the past. So this is data from 2017, 2018, and 2019. Again, this is very small. When you look at compliance carbon markets, the size of the compliance carbon markets is hundreds of billions of dollars a year. And it's likely going to go beyond $1 trillion a year over the coming years. When you look at the voluntary carbon market, total, it has only been hundreds of millions of dollars a year in 2017 through 2019. However, because of these corporate commitments and that growth, this voluntary carbon market, the demand for voluntary carbon credits is growing significantly. The two things I'll mention, it is looking at these prices. They've been relatively low. So renewable credits, they are cheaper, so around $1–2 a ton, US dollars a ton. But they've also had some of the largest volumes. There was a lot of credits. There still is a lot of credits, offset credits internationally from renewable energies. Forestry and land use has been growing a lot, and you're going to see that most of the volume in the voluntary market will be from agriculture and forestry, these land use credits. They also have been and will continue to likely get the highest prices in the market. So they've been still relatively low in the past, $3, $4, $5, $6 a ton. However, now we are starting to see deals, so over-the-counter deals and bilateral deals, where it is $10, $20 a ton, and in some cases even more. What many have recognized is that the voluntary carbon market, it requires a lot of support and improvements in order to scale it. It has the potential to go from hundreds of millions of dollars to over 100 billion. However, it has to see a lot of improvements around transparency and liquidity and confidence in the voluntary carbon market. It's really challenging right now because for many, at least, because it is quite an opaque market. Like I said, you only have over-the-counter and bilateral deals. If you have the right improvements in the voluntary carbon market, where it does enhance transparency, and you do improve that liquidity, and you do ensure integrity in that market, according to McKinsey, you could see a scaling in this voluntary carbon market by 15 times over the next decade, by 2030. So not insignificant. There's a huge amount of opportunity in this space. What I actually want to mention is that the task force for scaling the voluntary carbon market is trying to accomplish just those things that I said were required or have been identified as being required to improve and scale the voluntary carbon market. So this task force was launched late last year, and it's being driven by Mark Carney and Bill Winters, who is the CEO of Standard Charter. And there have been over 250 organizations that have been working on how to potentially enhance transparency of the voluntary carbon market for several months. They are looking at how you could see core carbon principles be created, and an attribute taxonomy, core carbon reference contracts for the voluntary carbon market, new or modified market infrastructure to enable trade and post-trade financing and data. Also a new governance body globally, a new governance system or body for the voluntary carbon market to support high integrity credit supply and ensuring demand integrity from purchasers and big companies. So it's really, I encourage people to watch this space. There will be an announcement in early July with outcomes from this voluntary carbon market task force and the initial piloting of these some of these recommendations that I just mentioned. So it is an important initiative to watch, and I encourage you to keep a lookout for that over the coming months and through the remainder of the year. I know that I have taken you on a whirlwind journey around carbon markets and net zero globally. So I'll just wrap with some key takeaways for delegates, just to tease out some of these important takeaways around carbon markets, but through the lens of investors and innovators, including startups. So first, as I've said many times now, there is massive growth potential and outlooks for carbon markets. And that's not only across compliance carbon markets, but also voluntary carbon markets. There is this growing opportunity across all project types for your projects and investments. So greenhouse gas reduction projects, greenhouse gas avoidance projects, and greenhouse gas removals, including nature-based removals and geotechnological removals. There is this growing demand and prices, especially for high integrity carbon offsets. You have then these new and growing carbon revenue streams for innovators and entrepreneurs. You have growing international market partnerships and financing opportunities that are cropping up very, very quickly, including a blending of carbon and other financing mechanisms and structures. So the important checklist I've said to leave you with is know your greenhouse gas technology and service, and know the pathways to monetize that through carbon markets. That could easily mean know your greenhouse gas crediting, so offset crediting protocols and the methodologies, those that currently exist or those that are under development. Or if they are not under development or exist, should they be created? And what kind of coalition and standard could be the home to develop new crediting protocols for certain technology types? Know your market, know the location, know the region, voluntary or compliance markets. It's important to understand that, to then know your opportunities, monetization pathways, but also possible risks going forward. I encourage all of you, and that's, all being NGOs, investors, project developers, lawyers, certainly major companies, to really advocate for stable climate policy and stable emissions trading systems, and make sure that you advocate for enhanced market transparency and liquidity and participation in those markets. Finally, grow your global alliances. And I hope that that's partially why NextRise invited me to speak to you today. It's to grow those global partnerships internationally, and that's with other international business groups and multilateral development banks and other governments and company groups like IETA. Grow those alliances, become part of these communities, and that's especially important if you have clean export opportunities where you could see those exports really grow and scale, where carbon markets and these carbon revenue streams play a role in allowing for that to occur. And with that, I thank you all very, very much. I'll end my remarks and say goodbye. Special thanks again to the NextRise organizers, and of course, all of you for joining me virtually. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and I hope to be with many of you in Seoul or somewhere else in the world live. And hopefully that happens sometime soon. Take care, and wishing you all the best from Canada.